Hi, good morning. Can you hear me? I assume so. Hello? I can't see you. I'm Jim Friedlich with the Lenfest Institute for Journalism. I'm delighted this morning to lead a conversation with two of the most high-impact leaders of nonprofit news organizations, Dick Tofel and Sarah Alvarez. Dick was for many, many years the president and co-CEO of ProPublica, building the organization to $40 million of revenue and nearly 200 people. We worked together to my delight and a lot of learning for me at the Wall Street Journal for 15 years. Sarah Alvarez is the founder and editor-in-chief, that's her right title, of Outlier Media, the Detroit-based service journalism organization and a powerhouse that so many of us admire and seek to emulate. She is here with her business partner, Candace Fortman. Candace, you out there someplace? There she is in the front row, like a good student. And her father, Juan Alvarez. Please say hello. Several years ago, when we were just getting started in Philadelphia, I asked Cheryl Thompson Morton, who ran our Philadelphia programs and now runs the Black Media Initiative for the CUNY School of Journalism, who she admired most and who we could emulate in Philadelphia in terms of journalism that serves the needs of the full community. And she cited Sarah Alvarez, and we had Sarah come in and talk to us, and we've been talking ever since. Our plan this morning is to be highly, highly pragmatic. We want to talk about how each of these organizations was built, what the bumps, roadblocks, and pitfalls and problems were along the way. We want to talk about your successes, but we're more interested in your failures and your challenges. And in that same spirit, I'm going to move pretty quickly to audience questions, audience input, so that we can have a real conversation and not just monologue. But I want to start with an origin story from each of you in reverse chronological order, which means, Sarah, take us back to 2016. Why did you think Detroit and the world needed something called Outlier Media? In that, if you could explain the name, the niche, and the need. You're on.
There we go. Okay. So I didn't really think that the world needed Outlier Media. What I did think was that the way that news was working to serve communities was not a way that was actually creating enough value for those communities. And I also thought that the way that most news organizations ignored the biggest slice of the population and the biggest slice of the public, which is people who are struggling economically, was a recipe for disaster in terms of our society and in terms of the industry. So I wanted to think of a way that you could design and build a news organization that would seek to meet the needs of people who need information most in order to survive first, right? And not just try to influence like dinner conversation or thinking or self-actualization. I thought we could design something where we would first meet the needs that really existed in our community. The name came from, really looking at data around what people needed to try to figure out where those information gaps were that we should fill. And in data journalism and in data work in general, what you're often looking for is the trend line. So where are all the dots clustered? And what does that say? Pardon me. And I felt like Detroit and the needs of low-income people were generally not in the trend line, but were incredibly important. And in data, that's an outlier.
So the outlier is your audience or your concept for the news organization or Detroit itself?
All of those things and us too, right? Us as an organization being willing to really do something different and kind of go outside of the trend, but hope to pull the trend towards us.
Again, to the genesis of all this, you are a civil rights attorney by training.
Yeah.
From Columbia Law School. You were working in Detroit in public media, and you decided to start a bootstrap news organization. Is that right?
Yeah, I was actually working in public media in a statewide public media affiliate, Michigan Radio, and I was living in Ann Arbor and did not come to Detroit until I started Outlier, and
But
that's when I moved.
that was not a sufficient or appropriate platform for you to do what your passion was?
No, I love public radio and public television, but I am very critical of both because I do not think that public media strives to serve a big enough swath of the public to really be in keeping with its mission. And I was really disappointed when I went into public media that it did not even seem to be an ambition of theirs. And so I did feel like we needed to do something different.
Got it. So Dick, I'm going to turn to you, and then we'll kind of ping pong between the two of you. Take us back to 2007 and the advent of ProPublica. Officially, is it ProPublica or ProPublica? The first time I asked you this, you said, if you'll fund me, you can pronounce it any way you want.
That's even though I don't work there anymore, that's still the answer now. I feel like if you make up a Latin word, you ought to defer to the audience, so we did.
It turns out that 2007 was the peak of the United States newspaper industry economically. It was the biggest dollar value of revenue was as late as 2007. And this is probably not unrelated to that, but where did this thing come from?
So that is true, but as you know, the most profitable year was actually 2000, right? And ever since 2005, in fact, the newspaper industry has been in decline relentlessly with the advent of consumer broadband. And Herb and Marion Sandler, who were the original lead funders of ProPublica, understood that very quickly. And they, in 2006, sold the bank they had built and ended up with an enormous amount of money.
They were in the savings and loan business in California, is that right?
Correct. Yes. Right. Starting with a single savings and loan in Oakland and ending up with a firm that was worth $24 billion when they sold it. And they had been active philanthropists, but decided they wanted to spend the rest of their lives as full-time philanthropists, and did. They were the kind of people who get up and work on their philanthropy from literally 6 a.m. until 9 p.m., 7 days a week, for both of them for the rest of their lives. And one of the things they wanted to do was something in investigative journalism that they were prepared to put up to $10 million a year for 3 years into. They looked around a lot, talked to a lot of people, and ultimately were persuaded by Paul Steiger, who was in the process of retiring as the managing editor of the Wall Street Journal, that you could create a freestanding digital news organization that could share its biggest stories with legacy news organizations, co-publish them, and go from there. And I think that insight of Paul's turned out to be, he was going to retire, and they said to him, if you'll run it, we'll fund it. And we were off to the races.
So obviously this is kind of manna from heaven, a wonderful gift by a generous family, but two potential downsides that didn't seem to go wrong. One is single funder dependence, and others thinking, well, you're pretty rich, I don't need to fund you. The second is, if I had gone to you when I was heading advertising at the Wall Street Journal, and you were the newsroom attorney and said, I have a savings and loan advertiser who wants to give us $10 million a year, and kind of ultimately they'll own and control the news product, you would have said absolutely not. What gave you comfort? And I know that doesn't characterize what happened at ProPublica, but what gave you comfort that a single source and a potentially politically biased donor would be a happy marriage in the long run?
Yeah, so first of all, it wasn't quite a single source. It was the overwhelmingly predominant source.
Right.
But, and so maybe this is part of the answer for me. I went around and talked to people as I got involved in this. I was the first employee because Paul needed to finish out the year at the Wall Street Journal in 2007. And one guy named Herb Sturz, who I don't know if any of you know of, but who was a great nonprofit entrepreneur in New York, said to me, are these people going to fund this forever? And I said, no, that's not the plan. And he said, well, then you need to have other funders right up front. And So the second time I ever met Herb Sandler, I said to him, Herb Sturs says we need other funders. And he said, and I explained why, and he said, oh, that sounds true. And he went and found 3 other funders.
The gift that keeps on giving.
Including the MacArthur Foundation. And so we had actually 4 funders at launch, which was an important signal to people that it was going to be different. And then we had a plan from very early on to diversify the funding. So that was part of the answer to the first question. On the second question, first of all, the Sandlers were relentlessly determined to stay out of the editorial mix. They had hired the editor, but he was the editor of the Wall Street Journal. And frankly, I think generally probably the best respected newspaper person in the country at that point. Paul had won every Lifetime Achievement Award there was in journalism. And from the first meeting of the board of ProPublica, it was established that the board would never know what we were working on until we had published it, and that it has remained the case from that day till this. Occasionally, as he got to know the staff better over the years, people would approach Herb, because he was a lovely, approachable guy, and say, you know, I'm working on this great story. And I once saw Herb at a cocktail party literally say to a reporter, stop, don't tell me. I'm not supposed to know. I don't want to know. And he didn't. He wanted to read it like everybody else that morning. And then, frankly, as I think you need to do ultimately with issues of independence from donors, the test was going to be whether it was true or not, whether we were playing it straight, whether we were getting it right, and whether we really did seem to be independent.
Well, thanks. Exaggerating for effect just a little bit here, I could call this a kind of tale of 2 startups. One is scrappy, bootstrapped, and still so. The other was born with something of a silver spoon in its mouth, admittedly. And
Ann Richards said of George Bush 41 that he was born on third base and thought he hit a triple. And what I always said about ProPublica was, we were born on third base, but we knew it.
Good to know. Good Texas analogy. Sarah, any sort of near-death experiences or kind of sleepless nights in trying times that you would want to share along the way? And I'm curious, since you have an annual budget of $1.3 million now, aspiring to at least double that. The median Lion news organization, according to Chris Cruson, has an annual budget of $125,000. So any advice for living through lean times?
Yeah, I mean, this is our first year where our budget has been that way. We started out with $75,000. That was our annual budget for year 1 and year 2. We have had many times when we almost gave up. And I think to be a news organization of value starting without a lot of money, you need to be relentlessly disciplined and relentlessly focused on creating value. You also have to be lucky, because I think that Candace and I were lucky to have each other and not burn out at exactly the same time, so that we could kind of keep going and not burn out, so that we could receive, that big grant. And the catalyzing grant for us was from the American Journalism Project last year, giving us $1 million over 3 years. And that has made all the difference, because we were able to start investing in some of the infrastructure. I think the thing that I would say that has changed the most for me, getting out of survival mode, is that when I started this, I wish that we never planned to exist for very long. And that was, I think, smart, because we didn't know that we could. And, you can only do this for so long when you actually need money to live too. So I wish, though, that in the beginning I would have planned for small things but dreamt really big. And I didn't dream big at the beginning. I was too focused on creating value just along the way that I didn't even have a vision of like, well, what if somebody gave us $1 million or $10 million? And I remember City Bureau, after they got their first $1 million grant, Daryl asked me like, well, when are you gonna get your $1 million? And I was like, I don't want $1 million. I don't know what I would do with it. Like that, don't stress me out.
The last panel was about how $1 million is not a lot of money these days.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's still a lot of money. If anybody would like to give us a small change of $1 million, we will take it.
Let me ask you, it's wonderful that AJP has supported you in the way that they have, as they have so many others. I'm going to be interviewing them this afternoon. But what about Ford? What about big Detroit money? This is a city that was the beneficiary of a huge amount of federal aid, and the amount of money that's been generated in Detroit and the amount of money that has flowed into Detroit through certain hands, as you've documented on your own site, is astronomical, and you're getting a little ladle of that.
Oh, we're not even getting a teaspoonful of that. Let me be clear.
Is the constraint a business run by women of color? Is the constraint that it's journalism and you haven't explained it fully? Is it that people don't think of this business as a philanthropy? What
It is all of those things.
Holding you back?
It is all of those things. But I do think that philanthropy local philanthropy in Detroit and probably in a lot of other places is not used to giving to journalism. And while we would like them to do that more, I also think it is incumbent upon us to prove our value and prove that we can make a difference in people's lives on a day-to-day basis and help them to survive, because there are so many important causes in cities where people struggle. And to convince somebody, no, you should give to me instead of the Pope Francis Center, right, we better be able to actually have results that would make a difference in people's lives. And journalism organizations aren't used to talking about their work that way. They're not used to trying to do that, to actually improve the conditions in the community. And I think if we want those local dollars, we need to be ready to do that.
Let me point to a story that caught my eye, and then I'll turn to Dick on the challenges of having too much money. From your site this morning, Detroit's Downtown Development Authority has canceled 13 of its last 20 board meetings. So if the Washington Post tagline is "Democracy dies in darkness," yours might be "Democracy dies in Detroit." What is it about that story that attracted you? Where did the story come from? I think it was a function of the Documenters Project being there to watch and listen, correct?
Right. It was. So that did come to us from our Documenters Network, where we train and pay people to cover public meetings and also take special assignments. So right now we have documenters spending 40 hours on the bus this week just to document public transportation and the challenges with it. So it's
literally 40 hours on the bus.
Like literally,
yeah.
40 hours on the bus, because public transportation is in crisis in our city. But yes, the Downtown Development Authority has control over tens of millions of dollars every year, and more importantly,
$55 million, it said in the story.
That's right, and they capture those taxes from the library and from the Detroit Public Schools. And so if those institutions are going to be missing out on tens of millions of dollars that they really need, then these folks should at least be able to go to a meeting to decide how to spend that $55 million. And, it makes a difference that they know we're paying attention not just to what they do, but what they don't do. And we have seen, since we took over the Documenters program a little over a year ago, we've seen increased public comment. We've seen them postponing votes often because they are getting pushback. And we've seen, organizations like the DDA, which feels like they are accountable to no one, actually realize that they need to behave like people are watching, because we are.
Fantastic. Congratulations. Dick, if you were advising some of the startups in this room or in this industry who have been very well funded from the jump, of the Baltimore Banner, Emily Keaton may be here from a new startup to be named in Houston with support from Arnold, I think it's Kinder, and the Houston Foundation and AJP, a pending launch in Cleveland. What would you advise them about how to husband their cash? Get big quick, go big or go home, steward your cash. It's got to last you a long time, or all of the above.
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, the first thing, let me say, is I actually have more fun talking to people. One of the things that I have most fun doing is I'm on Sarah's board, I should say, just so people know. And operating at that level is maybe a little bit more challenging, but much more fun day to day. Because, you know, listening to her talk about this, remember, for the small scale that Outlier is, it's close to 20 times what it was when it started, right? And that's a very, very big deal. You know, and I'm very proud of what we accomplished at ProPublica. It's 4 times what it was when we started, and that's also great. But it's a different kind of hockey stick. To answer your question directly, you do, if you're starting at significant scale, you do, it's, you know, the old thing, you do only get one chance to make a first impression.
Right.
And so I think it's really important to come out of the gate strong, as, for instance, the Baltimore Banner, I think, has come out of the gate very strong. But you don't want to be imprudent about it. You don't want to spend all the money. I think the 2 most important things remain, and this is true at any level, to have a clear editorial vision, and to run the place like a business. And I think that is literally true at very small scale and very large scale.
So apropos of running the place like a business, you two are an attorney. You studied public policy as well. Neither of you started your careers as journalists. You've converted into an editor-in-chief. Dick, you were never a journalist. You ran the business side and legal most prominently at the Journal. What do you think that says about the leadership needs and the skill set requirements to scale these businesses? I don't mean it a leading question. They should be run by non-journalists, but it's noteworthy that the new CEO of the Texas Tribune announced yesterday, Sonal Shah, comes from government, Goldman Sachs, and nonprofit leadership at the United Way.
I mean,
what's going on?
Look, there are a few journalists who turn out to be great editors and also great business leaders. I mean, we're in Austin where we've seen 2 of them, Evan Smith and Emily Ramshaw, but I think, you know, you'd be very hard-pressed to name 10 more in the country, and it's a really big country. Most people who are visionary editors are not great business leaders. And the other thing is that, as you know, Jim, the newspaper industry, out of which most of this does at some level grow, paradoxically has had the most talented people in the world on the editorial side, and is always, you know, and you and I were newspaper executives, but the truth is the business side of legacy newspapers was never operating at the same world-class level as the editorial leader.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
And so there's a historical element of, you know, we're not going to get most of the leadership from there. It's going to need to come from elsewhere.
Sarah, you decided to partner with Candace Fortman as the executive director. And what did she bring that you didn't? What time of yours did she liberate that you thought could be better deployed?
I mean, all the time. I'm more comfortable on the editorial side, much more comfortable. And so I do think that it was impossible for Outlier to grow if I was going to try to be on both sides, right? And that would be the same case for Candace. If she didn't have a strong editorial side, she couldn't do what she's doing. There really does need to be a partnership. I will say that I think for both the editorial and the business side of small news organizations, it is a problem-solving function all of the time, right? And that is something that we've seen, because we run a text message-based service for people who need information quickly. And I see the same thing with business as I do with our tech stack problems, is that people are not interested in really doing creative problem solving around non-sexy problems. Like, news is not going to be an incredibly profitable industry ever. That's not its core function. Its core function is to serve the community. And we need people who are willing to get in there and say yes, and it's very, very hard to do this, so how can we do this really creatively? Instead of trying to sell like, well, this is a place where you can really succeed and transform something, like we could actually make a real difference, and I don't think we really lead with that enough. And that's on the business side and the editorial side.
That you made an enormous difference. If you haven't seen it, Dick wrote an article on his Substack newsletter, which I think was reposted by Neiman, about Sarah's business, which said before communities need news, they need information about the basic civic needs at large in America, and how business like this can be cloned and replicated around the country, I hope at scale. I want to talk very briefly about something that will test all of our mettle, and that is the next business recession. And we'll take questions after that, so if people want to line up at the mic, if you do have questions or comments, please do. Whether we're in a recession now or there's one around the corner or not, there's no doubt that we live in a cyclical world. This business has not really been through many business cycles. How do you think about that? What will happen in the next recession? Where will it hurt and test us the most? Membership, major gifts, reader payments, all of the above. How do you think about the cycle?
Yeah, well, I mean, the one thing that's for sure is it'll hurt badly in advertising and sponsorship and corporate. The big mystery, I think, is we have not had a real recession or a traditional recession since this enormous dependence grew up on memberships or on online subscriptions. And I think, obviously we had a very, very brief and entirely strange, from an economic point of view, pandemic recession that lasted sort of the economic equivalent of 30 seconds. So we didn't see that. I'm going to be very interested, and I have no idea which way it's going to go, to see what happens, for instance, to New York Times subscriptions, at that level of scale in a real recession. And I think that will have very important implications for nonprofit journalism as well. Foundations, we know how they respond. If the market closes way down for the year, next year will be bad.
So I'm going to ask this of Arnold, Ford, the Knight Foundation, and AJP this afternoon.
I thought what Darren Walker did in the spring of 2020 to lean against that and to borrow that money was a real act of leadership. It was important. He brought other people along, but very honestly, I don't see any indication that anybody is preparing to do that again if the market closes way down for the year, which does still seem much more likely than not.
So, Sarah, are you investing ahead of a downturn, or are you battening down the hatches and planning to go into survival mode?
No, we spent too long in survival mode. We are always investing. And I think that is going to continue to be true for smaller news organizations, because while a recession is definitely going to impact our bottom lines, it's also going to really impact our communities and the needs that we see there. And we are going to have to work harder than ever to meet them. And I think we're going to have to do that whether or not we think we'll be rewarded for it. Because again, this is an essential function and we have no other choice, really. We can be smart about it, but that's what we have to do.
Bravo.
Jim, if I can just add one other thing. I do hope, particularly to the extent that any of them are here, that major donors will lean against the inclination of institutional philanthropy to pull back in a recession. It is a flaw in the institutional philanthropy model that unfortunately I've seen this many too many times at major foundations, that their actual bottom line value is preserving the size of the endowment. That is what it is. I don't think you're going to change institutional foundation culture, but I hope that major donors who actually have much more money at this point can help be counter-cyclical on that.
That's from your lips to God's ears, as the expression goes. There's a question. Can you tell us who you are and where you work?
Oh, hi there. I'm Steve Sachs.
Hey, Steve. How are you?
Hey, Jim. I'm about to join The Guardian on Monday.
Congratulations.
Running the U.S. business. I'm also on the board of the Texas Tribune and work in nonprofit local news.
And you helped Cityside with
I did, yeah. I helped Cityside get launched, yeah. I have a question for Dick. I'm wondering, ProPublica has had such a big impact overall in the years that it's been around. I'm wondering if you've, while you were there, if you designed any impact measures of something quantitative that routinely you would refer to, and if so, what those measures were.
Yeah, I actually wrote a long paper about this about 9 years ago, which is still on their site. If you go to About an Impact, it's called Issues Around Impact, I think. It's a white paper. And it talks about how we charted, and they still chart, impact at ProPublica, which is around spurring change and literally identifying measure for measure how to do that. That's how they do it in particular, and the key to doing it that way, I think, is transparency, to help the everyone police whether what you're claiming to have changed in the world you really changed. But much more generally, and therefore much more importantly, I think the real question around measuring impact is to get serious about what your mission is and what it isn't, and how you measure succeeding against your mission, and you will have developed a meaningful measure of that if it's something at which you could fail. If you have, in my judgment, if you have so many different kinds of possible ways to succeed that you'll always succeed on one or two of them, then I think you run the risk of what I call, refer to as the Lake Wobegon problem. Garrison Keillor used to say, the great thing about Lake Wobegon is all the children here are above average. That's not meaningful. You need a way you're going to succeed, and you will know you have identified a way you are going to succeed if you might fail at it.
The lady on the left.
Hi, my name is Alicia. I just launched a newsroom in Riverside County a month ago.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
So my question's for Sarah. In those really lean times, this newsroom of mine is going fully funded by my savings account. So in those lean times, how did you balance trying to find those other sources of revenue while also creating content that was impactful for your audience?
It's really difficult, as you know. And I think that the only way to do it is to know that you're not going to be able to do both all the time. I really felt like designing a model that would create value more consistently without taking more resources was the way to do it. And I decided to focus on the model first so that I would be able to show people, like, this is worth investing in because it's going to work. I don't need your money to think of something. I just need your money to make it work. And I would say that the other thing is to really work in partnership as much as you can and collaboratively as much as you can. If not locally, then, with other partners. We've worked with ProPublica. We have a collaborative now of, 9 different news organizations in Detroit because we share resources. And that
includes public media, I assume?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, good.
We want them to be better. So I think, share resources and let those folks know, especially the people that you trust in those collaborations, that when you have resources, you'll share them back. That's how we've made it work. And it's also so lonely that without those collaborations, it becomes very difficult to just keep going and feel like it's possible.
Thank you.
The lady on my right.
Hi, my name's Rosina Breen. I'm the new CEO and Editor-in-Chief at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in London. I've come up through editorial leadership, so I was interested in your comments about business leadership, and I think actually that's right. And I've joined from a very large PSB corporation, the BBC, where I worked across local, network, and global news. So really, I'm after a key piece of advice from each of you in my first 12 months as I sort of move into this exciting, thrilling, but also challenging non-profit world.
I have a question for your question, and thank you for traveling to be here. It's gratifying. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism is funded how? Is it government funded in any way, or is it independently funded, foundation funded?
Yeah, we're the UK's largest non-profit independent newsroom, and I would say largely we are funded by grants, so including Logan Gates. We cover UK, we have a UK remit and a global remit, including the environment, dirty money, global health, and big tech, as well as local democracy and inequality. So I suppose my focus is actually on transformation in terms of diversifying our content, diversifying who our audience is, telling stories in a more innovative way, but also diversifying revenue. So at this point, we don't have a membership scheme. We've just completed our largest audience survey to date. And so I think diversification of revenue is an absolute must if we're to sustain.
In terms of both scale and focus, I think it's the closest analogy is ProPublica.
Yeah,
So
no,
Dick,
and
why don't you take
I'm a big admirer of the Bureau, and congratulations. So that all seems like a very sensible agenda. I guess my one piece of advice, while you pursue it, is a little bit of a counterweight, which is focus. It is very easy, particularly if you start trying to do a whole bunch of different things and new things, to lose sight of the main event. And so the one thing that I would urge on you is to stay focused, particularly on what makes the Bureau's work distinctive. I wrote a biography of the founder, a guy named Barney Kilgore, who was the founder of the modern Wall Street Journal, and the most important thing I think I learned from him, from sort of spending a lot of time thinking about his life and career, was that the key to great journalism organizations is distinctiveness to the thing that nobody else can do, or at least can do as well. So I would just keep your eyes firmly fixed on that.
Focus, focus, focus. Sir.
Yes, I'm interested in the community emphasis that you chose, and there's a whole thing about solutions journalism that's going around, and James Fallows in Breaking the News writes about what went on in one community in North Carolina where they held events that were based on the journalism in order to get public officials and citizens working on solutions that the journalism suggested. And I'm wondering what you think about that kind of approach that Fallows wrote about in his book.
Sarah, why don't maybe take one anecdote about a solution that Outlier was able to provide and frame that in a thought about solutions journalism writ large?
Well, I think accountability is a solution, and that's what we focus on. think actually it's not, in my experience, it has not been that people don't know what to do about a problem. It's that we are focusing on the wrong people who are not actually invested in changing anything. So the way that we function is that we're trying to get information into the hands of people who will create solutions for themselves and their neighbors once they're able to. And I think that that has proven effective. For example, we used to do a lot of reporting about the tax auction. It is not that nobody knew how to do something other than a giant tax auction that swept up tens of thousands of houses a year. It wasn't like we didn't have a better idea. That was a certain thing that benefited certain people and really impacted others very, very detrimentally. What we decided to do was not write about like what are alternatives to the tax auction, but to get people information when they needed it and in time so that they knew their house was at risk. And oftentimes it wasn't the house that they owned, it was the house that they were renting. And that allowed them to make a choice that would keep them from being impacted by the auction and actually get them to be able to talk to officials in time and not just be in survival mode.
So information as solution.
That is the solution, and accountability is the solution.
Great watchwords. Sir.
This question is for Sarah. Sarah, we've admired your work from where we are in Ohio for a long time. And so our company is going to come up on 10 years in June.
What's the title?
Richland Source in Mansfield,
for you.
Ohio. And I'm thinking about, my question is for you and Candace, what are you thinking about your biggest risks are right now? You've grown Outlier, you're bigger now, you're 20 times bigger than when you started, you're having an outsized impact in your home community. You're kind of still a startup, but you're sort of a real thing now.
Yeah.
What are you working on? Like, what's keeping you up at night as a leader that you really want to solve
Great
so that
question.
you can move forward from where you are right now?
The same stuff. I'm sure Candace will have something to say about this too, but the same things keep me up. I think what I'm concerned about is not expanding too quickly, not losing our mission. Especially if you're a small news organization, you're always pushed to how do you scale? How do you get bigger? We're trying to think about how can we make replication of our work easier for others and yet deepen our relationship with our community. We have an amazing model. We are very good at our jobs. We have not created the impact in Detroit that we need to create, right? Like Detroit is still one of the poorest cities in this country, and that means we have not done our job. And what keeps me up at night is that we're gonna think that we are doing a fantastic job and that we can go work somewhere else when we have not fixed this problem that we set out to fix. And just keeping your eye on the ball and not believing your own bullshit is what I always say is like so hard, and you have to be so disciplined to do it. But that's what worries me.
Can I just say two things from the perspective of a very happy board member? One is what you just heard to me is really important. I will never forget listening to the Google boys when they were in like year 3 say, you think we're doing great, we think we're failing. Google was supposed to solve the problem of what's the answer to my question, and we're not there yet. Great leaders say exactly that, and they mean it. That's really important. Second thing is, just because Sarah hasn't mentioned it, they've, in my judgment, been really successful in executing 2 mergers so far in a way that is clever and effective and very practical and are open to more. And I think there's going to be a lot more M&A in this sector generally, and being smart about that, I think, is really important going forward.
Those are 2 terrific points. Ma'am.
Also, a great segue to my question. I'm Lisa Lepson from The Forward. I was debating whether coming to this or the partnerships session, and Sarah, you mentioned partnerships in the answer to one of the previous questions. So partnerships also take up so much time and so challenging to navigate, and I didn't even know you had also done mergers, and also ProPublica has millions of partnerships. How do you think about that, navigate those, make sure that they are actually beneficial and not just taking up all your time?
Well, Dick, I think that the partnerships that ProPublica does are mostly about resource sharing. And I think for us, so I'll let you answer that part, but for us, our relationships are really about resource conserving. And I think it's helpful to know what you're trying to do, right? Sometimes we are trying to share resources with organizations that are even smaller than ours, but a lot of times we're working together with people to conserve the resources that we have and use them effectively. It does take a lot, but actually it's like remarkably less than I thought. It's finding the right people who are invested in it for the right reasons. And I will say, in my experience, funder-based partnerships and collaborations are not helpful. It really has to be authentically driven from the newsrooms, and you have to have a shared sense of purpose. It can't be coming from outside. But once you find those partners, just stick with them.
The only thing that I would add to that is actually to operationalize it, which is to say, I think partnerships are most effective when they are driven through the organization, when you inculcate a culture of partnership. I am a real big non-fan of, we have a senior executive who is in charge of all the partnerships. I think that's exactly backwards. I think they're much more effective when there are people at the second and third levels of an organization who are each working on partnerships and who are, less buzzword, just building relationships around the industry that are mutually beneficial to people.
Just an observation, both of you have partnerships in your corporate DNA and your personal DNA. This is fundamental to what you do. ProPublica was built on partnerships. Yeah. It's not a nice to have. There seems to be one more question, and then we're close to time, and I'll make some closing comments.
Hi, my name is Tracy Simmons. I'm out of Spokane, Washington, and I run a website called Spokane Faves, and we're very niche. We just cover religion, and we have been operating on a shoestring budget for the past 10 years. We just turned 10, but someone actually did just give us $1 million, and so
For you.
But I don't know how to, I don't know what to do with it. I'm staying at the La Quinta.
You have a lot of
which I
takers
don't
in the room.
recommend. So when you first got your big chunk of money, I guess my question is, what did you do with it to grow it and to invest it in your product?
Well, we started investing in the business side, in the infrastructure that would allow us to continue to grow. We felt really confident about our editorial side, and Candace is so nice and had let us use almost all our money on the editorial side. She was a team of one on the business side. So investing in that, I think, isn't key. But I'll also say what Dick and I talked about, and what I think he really helped me to get out of that survival mode. And he said, and I really believe this, I've become a complete evangelist for it, go for a general audience. Don't keep yourself niche. Religion affects everybody. Everybody cares about it. I'm an atheist. I care deeply about it, right? I think about it a lot. You can get a general audience, and you can't create impact easily without a general audience. It is impossible, and we have to stop worrying about our elites and our own niches. So I would say invest in the business side and start dreaming big about how you're going to get that general audience.
One more quick question.
Okay. Hi, I'm Susan Smigelski-Acker with Virginia Peninsula Media, also the publisher and co-founder. I approached another organization. We cover mostly arts, entertainment, festivals, food, and drink. We're going to be going into more civic stuff next year. But I approached another one that covers business. Their owner is in California. We're in Virginia. He hasn't been in our area for 12 years. So how do we approached them, but they just weren't keen on the idea. There was kind of like this, I don't know, kind of feeling. So what do you do to form those partnerships? I also want to approach our local public radio station.
I'll give an example of one that worked. We started a partnership in the state of Pennsylvania called Spotlight PA. Partnership was built into it. It was Lenfest, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, an advanced newspaper in Harrisburg, and the Philadelphia Inquirer. Our kind of crosstown rival with a great deal of overlapping funding was called the PA Post. And in the height of the pandemic, I reached out to the CEO of WITF, and he very much wanted to put the two together. We preserved several of his most important team members. We took over his membership inflow, which was great for our business. We got a weekly newsletter out of it. He got a soft landing for a very valuable business, and now there's kind of one go-to source. So it had one piece of advice would be don't push it if it's not going to happen. That I think really good M&A bankers know when something is going to work and when it's not, and they are the first to cut it loose when it's not. I think we're just at time, and I wanted to thank you. I wanted to thank you all for your questions and patience in lining up. I had 3 very quick points to make. The first is that Dick has just published a book with Lenfest called The Elements of Nonprofit News Management, which is many of the lessons that he shared. You can download it from our website. You can get it on Amazon. It's really, really terrific. The title is a nod to Elements of Style, the classic Strunk and White, and it has many of the same attributes. It's just the facts, ma'am, and really terrific. We have worked, I'll back up. Lenfest is a funder, albeit a small one, but we're really an infrastructure provider, and we run a collection of services that we want as many people in this field to benefit from and enjoy as we can. One thing that we've done with Dick as our partner is provide small news organizations at our expense access to Dick's consulting time. We did that with New York Focus. We would love to do that again. I think it was sort of important to them and great learning for us. We have 3 learning communities. I think people from the leadership of each of them are here. One is called the Lenfest News Philanthropy Network. This is a group that was started by 4 advancement professionals that has now grown to 1,700 people. We have regular webinars, seminars, come one, come all, about how the heck to raise money. And the second is called the Statewide News Collective. It's exactly what it sounds like. On the first, you can find Annie Madonia, our head of advancement, to talk to her about it, or Fraser or Tracy, or Terry, excuse me, from the News Philanthropy Network. We have something called the Statewide News Collective, which is for statewide news organizations. It was co-founded by the Texas Tribune, Spotlight PA, RevLab, your host, and the Lenfest Institute. That's now has 35 states of 50. We would love to have all 50. Comparing best practices, trading code, sharing as much information and help as they can. And the last, that is led by Yossi Lichterman. The last, led by Amy Kovac-Ashley, who is also here, is a new audience cohort. We assumed leadership of a group from CUNY in New York. They have 200 people in audience and audience development and audience engagement cohort, ProPublica, New York Times, on down, sharing information about how to grow audiences and how to increase engagement for the benefit of these businesses. So that one is just getting started. We relaunched it at ONA. So the last thing I would like to say is that Juan Alvarez, you should be very proud indeed. Thank you.